Alright, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are in Age of Wonders 4 on the open beta for the Watcher patch, about to discuss the Underground meta. So this video is going to be two things. First, it's going to be a discussion on Underground Adaptation, on the updates to it, the way that it actually plays out, what it makes available to you. And then more of it is going to be a discussion on a faction that I've designed to try to take advantage of Underground Adaptation. That part of the video, I'll put a lot of different timestamps in, so that way you can skip around, but we'll do a conversation about just economic development when you're playing in the Underground, and then military development if you're playing as this faction in particular. We're going to start it off by discussing just Underground Adaptation, on what this pick does, what it costs you, and now, critically, why I think it's worth picking up. So Underground Adaptation is a mind trait. Now keep in mind that mind traits are very, very powerful. There are some ridiculously useful things in there, like Elusive, which gets you +6 defense and resistance against retaliation and opportunity attacks. That is enormous in the late game. And then also in that same slot you have Adaptive, which is +30% experience just across the board, which is just a fantastic bonus, because that's going to be applying to your heroes in addition to your units, and so it's going to let you get really, really high level heroes very fast. So Underground Adaptation was kind of a meme for a while because it existed in the same space as taking 30 extra experience points on your heroes. Like, why would you take Underground under those circumstances? Well, it used to be that whenever you took Underground, invariably you would spawn a couple of Marauders down here, and those Marauders would eat your units, and then you'd be down a unit, and you'd feel bad because you took a mind trait that cost you a unit. But in this case, in the open beta, it's been updated, so now you can't spawn those little Marauder stacks. Now that does mean that for the people who, had good concentrated militaries, you're going to get slightly less experience points, but you're also going to get slightly more, because whenever you reveal a new resource here with Excavation, they're going to be guarded. It used to be that they spawned unguarded pretty often, and so you didn't get experience points from getting them. It was just free resources, but now they're guarded resources, and that also means when you clear them, you get more resources. So Underground Adaptation is really sacrificing your mind trait, just giving it up entirely for an enormous economic advantage. You need to use that advantage and put it to work, so you're going to get enormous amounts of gold, enormous amounts of production, lots and lots of artifacts, but you need to work it and actually do something with it, or you'll fall behind people who have a real mind trait. Now that said, it really is an enormous amount of resources that you get at the beginning of the game with Underground Adaptation. So the first thing that you get from it, of course, is the Excavation General Empire skill. This thing costs 125 Imperium at the moment, so that's just a giant chunk of Imperium that you get. Keep in mind that, like a lot of the other traits that you can have access to, your society traits, they're generally +5 Imperium if you take one of them. That means that you need 25 turns to catch up in terms of the Imperium generation generated by taking Underground Adaptation. This is really, really good, and I think that honestly some of the other adaptation traits need to get some sort of starting bonus equivalent to this, because this one is just a lot stronger than the other ones. But it does feel good because now Watcher has changed it so you can actually colonize through underground passages. So there's an underground passage here, and if it turns out that I need to colonize this space to take control of it from an enemy empire, I can, because not only do I have bonuses in terms of colonizing through here, but Underground Adaptation also allows you to colonize at 1 extra range. 1 extra range isn't like a huge deal on the surface, but it means that basically every single plot that you can put down, unless you're really, really constrained on territory, can have a luxury or a resource node. So this is a huge economic advantage that you get from taking Underground Adaptation. It's just a lot of resources at the beginning of the game, and of course it lets you move around a lot faster down here, which is a nice little perk if you're trying to out-excavate somebody, because ultimately I think most factions are going to want to take Excavation anyway. Getting these clods of dirt out of the way and getting, let's see. Okay, so we're up to 252 gold. We're at 331 gold on turn 2. Now that was 6 clods that we got to clear, and that's like a little more than you get on average, but here I think you'd get like 3 pretty consistently. So you can easily have hundreds and hundreds of gold on turn 2, which means that even on Brutal, where you start with way fewer resources, you don't need to be able to do anything in order to get a second hero on turn 2. You just need to send units out and excavate. So this faction plays really, really well on Brutal. That's true for basically all of the Underground Adaptation factions. I think that generally if you're going to go for Underground Adaptation, you do it because you build a faction that's designed to actually utilize all of these resources. Now, the easiest way that I found to utilize all these resources is this faction that I've designed right here. So for those of you who are just here to discuss the Underground Adaptation trait, goodbye. But the faction I think is fun and kind of highlights the power of the Mind trait in particular. All right, so here we are with Skittles and the Rainbow Dwarves. So this is a faction designed to try to utilize Underground Adaptation, leverage the strengths that it gives you, and also just do a little bit of stuff to take advantage of what we know about the Underground. So the Underground Adaptation ability gives you access to a huge amount of gold up front. That huge amount of gold means that you can support a really, really big industry economy if you want it, or a really big outpost economy if you want it, or in this case, both. Materium at the moment gives you an ability that allows you to, for 38 gold, get 2 tiles. All of your outposts are going to start with work camps as soon as you hit Materium 1. With 5 Materium pips, we can hit Materium 1 on turn 4 with this build, and therefore utilize all of the gold that's going to be funneling towards us to lay down lots and lots of outposts, claim a lot of land, but also allow our units to move around the board a lot faster. Outposts, of course, give you friendly territory where you can heal, but they also make it so you can kind of choo-choo train your troops everywhere, teleport them through the underground. It plays out really, really well. Now, this faction has some pretty strange things when it comes to our tomes. We start with this huge Materium thing, and from there we go Rainbow, and then we come back to Materium to finish it out, but we'll talk about the Tome Order after we're done talking about the rest of the faction. We are playing with spider mounts. If you think spider mounts are overpowered, then go ahead and switch them over to any of the other mounts. I think that generally nightmares are better in auto battles, and unicorns are better in manual battles, so depending on what sort of settings you play on, just keep that in mind. But if you're willing to let yourself play with spider mounts, I think they are generally the strongest, just because they're the strongest at the beginning of the game, and that's kind of what matters in a 4X. You want to get your snowball rolling faster, earlier, and that's what this faction does, because with all of this money, we're going to have access to Industrious, we're going to be able to build a builder's quarter, we're going to have Imperialists and Wonder Architects to just massively increase our industry at the beginning of the game, which means that if we need to, we can early build our tier 3 capital and therefore start cranking out bastions on like turn 20. You can absolutely do that with this faction if you want to, and if you have the economy to support it. And that's what Wonder Architects and Imperialists kind of do. Imperialists is mostly for the extra starting population and the order pip, because we want to be able to move into Tome of the Sanctuary, and having 2 order pip at the beginning of the game means that growth is very natural and very easy to accomplish. But Imperialist is also 20 extra gold and 20 city stability on turn 1, so this is a lot of extra resources, and it helps offset the fact that, you know, with a dragon ruler you're paying an enormous upkeep for that big beefy unit. And Wonder Architects is, I think, like my favorite trait in the game right now. It's so good. Wonder Architects allows your cities and your outposts to annex ancient wonders without population requirements, but that secretly means that your outposts can have 3 tiles annexed to it, the one that's on, the one it picks up with the work camp, and then also an ancient wonder. So you can have enormous Imperium economy with Wonder Architects and basically just a little bit more Imperium. So you don't need 5 in order to really leverage it here. We have 5 for a very specific reason. We have 5 because our Tome Order is going to look crazy. So we're starting with Tome of the Enchantment. Tome of the Enchantment is an amazing tome, and you want basically all of these spells as quickly as possible. Fortunately, you start with Summon Copper Golem, which means that on turn 1, if you can find a conduit to fight, you can summon a Copper Golem starting on turn 1. This is a huge advantage over people who do not play with Tome of Enchantment. You can just start summoning immediately. It's also really nice because Copper Golems are notorious for dying. These things are extremely trail. If you want to keep copper golems alive, then generally my recommendation is pick up Tome of the Evolution. With the ability from Tome of the Evolution, they do get a huge increase to their defense and resistance, but they're mostly just there as a placeholder for us. We don't really need iron golems in order to survive. We have copper golems to evolve into iron golems to use as siege weapons. That's it. That's all they're going to be for us, is ultimately catapults. So if they die, they die. This means that you're going to need an enormous amount of mana at the beginning of the game with these guys, but fortunately you have Rune Carver's Camp, and playing as Industrious, your special building is also a quarry, so you can have two quarries situated next to each other, giving each other quarry adjacency bonuses, and have a really big industry very early, and therefore also support a mana conduit very early. This means that you basically just use these guys as cannon fodder. If any of them survive, great. Don't throw them away if they're starting to get high on experience points, but like when they're a fresh summon and they die, oh no, it's 60 mana. Like, that's the most annoying thing about it. Spell Tempered Shields is fantastic just for extra resistance, because as Industrious, most of your units are going to have outrageous physical defense anyway, and so you just want ways to get stacking resistance and stacking status resistance to keep your guys alive, because the core of this is really going to be the mounted bastions and also mounted glade runners. The two of those units working in tandem can combat a lot of different types of units when they stay alive long enough, and that's what this build is designed to do. You're also going to have Awakened Tools, so you have huge amounts of production, Sundering Blades, Seeker Arrows. Everything about Tome of Enchantment's fantastic, and it lets us start with 5 Materium. From there, we're going to go over to Astral, and we're going to pick up Tome of Warding. Tome of Warding gives you access to Staves of Warding, magical wards, and bolstering support. If you want to do stuff with Mark of Invulnerability, this is very good in manual battles. The AI doesn't really use it well, but it's a nice spell to have access to if you do manual stuff. But even if you're just doing auto battles, magical wards are fantastic for bastions, because generally, as Industrious, the easiest way to combat you is with elemental or magical damage. So the more sort of magical damage resistance stacking that you can do, the more beefy your units are going to be, and that's where Staves of Warding comes in. With Staves of Warding, you can actually bring Steel Shapers to fights on like turn 70, because they can protect themselves very easily. As long as you're on the defense and you take the first turn and you bolster yourself, those units are going to be basically unkillable. You can still ward other people. +2 bolstered resistance is a huge amount of resistance that you get access to. It also critically turns Astral Affinity online for you. You need to get access to Astral and Shadow as quickly as possible in Age of Wonders 4, just because of what it does to your knowledge economy if you don't get them early. And so I think here you kind of have to go into either Astral or Shadow. And I just to highlight how unbelievably tanky these bastions can become, we've done warding, but you could do evocation instead if you don't really care about the survivability of your units. But from there, we're gonna go into Tome of the Doom Herald. Tome of the Doom Herald isn't really about getting just like super duper morale bombing. It's more about just getting a little bit of morale regeneration, so that way if your units die, they're less likely to rout. Because if we're bringing bastions and we're bringing glade runners, those are tier 3 units. They can definitely die, and they can definitely reduce your morale, and so having a way for your units to generate morale on their own is great. And Joy Siphoners plays really well with multi-target hits, and we have access to that with bastions and glade runners. So this is mostly for the survivability here, but also it critically gets us access to Doom Depth Trench, which, because we're going to be playing evil, are going to get a lot of extra knowledge from this building. This is going to help your research kind of catch up, because we aren't getting Shadow here until our first tier 2 tome. Generally speaking, I think getting Shadow as early as possible is very important for your knowledge economy. It can be a huge bonus to just get 150 knowledge in one fight, but if you end up fighting like 3 heroes in the beginning of the game because you declare war on a couple of free cities, having Shadow 3 gives you 450 knowledge from nowhere. So we're a little late to the Shadow party by picking picking up Tome of the Doom Herald here, but I think that generally speaking, we're still not going to be too far behind in terms of technology, because you can just build technology, right? Your economy is so big that you can just build academies out of nowhere. After Tome of the Doom Herald, we are going to pick up Tome of Glades. Tome of Glades is really important for a lot of different reasons. It gets us Glade Runners, which, because we're going to be playing with a mount, we are going to have mounted Glade Runners. These are great units. Even if you don't have a lot of damage stacking for them, they're still really, really good just because of Tracker's Mark. Having free actions is a huge deal. But of course, because they're mounted, they're very fast, hard to defend against, and because we'll be stacking nice little bonuses for extra attacks, and once we get to Crucible, they'll be able to do some serious damage. We have Leaf Skin for extra resistance. We have Aspect of the Root for just an outrageous amount of self-heal. With Aspect of the Root, your bastions take an extra step towards being functionally invulnerable, because if they have to just heal themselves for 30, that's not the end of the world. And also, you get access to Create Forest. This is a really nice spell if you're playing Underground, because you are not guaranteed to get access to mushroom forests. It is important that you get some for each city, and so if you don't, your tech economy kind of falls behind because you can't build libraries. And that's where Create Forest steps in, helps you get the libraries that you need on the cities you need. Sacred Meadow and Forest Warden are kind of just there. Forest Warden is nice if you have a lot of defensive wars going on, because it pairs well with Create Forest, but it is of course not possible to create forests in your enemy's capital and then attack out of them, as fun as that would be. But Tome of the Glades is really, really important for your damage output as well as your survivability. After that, we're going to pick up Tome of Dragons. Tome of Dragons with Draconian Transformation is kind of like the piece de resistance when it comes to the survivability of our bastions. It's also a major transformation that you get access to in a tier 3 tome. That means that ultimately you can do these major transformations very, very early. You can get them done on like turn 45 if you can get a really early second city, or a really early third is even better. But these things are obnoxious because now you have natural regeneration on your bastions and on your Glade Runners, and so they're just going to heal every single turn, in addition to being immune to burning, which is just a very common damage type. And of course, Draconic Rage, which, because we're going to have some really beefy, burly bastions at the front line, they'll have tons of hit points, and so they'll get this Draconic Rage bonus pretty consistently. But also important, Tome of Dragons gives you access to Young Dragon. Young Dragon is a very, very important tool for this faction. You have basically no punch. You have no way to break through people who are defending in your face. You need stuff like Tail Swipe or things like power attacks for your heroes. Like a lance is one of the best things you can find on the battlefield, just because of how good it is for your heroes, for how good it is for your army. But that's where dragons step in. I would generally recommend taking Obsidian Dragons, because I think that across the board you need access to electric damage more than anything else. But if you're playing against somebody who's running with a lot of undead, for instance, then you might as well just take a fire dragon, because undead are naturally going to be weak to fire. Just pick and choose whatever dragon you think generally counters what you're going to be coming up against. Not a golden dragon, unfortunately, but because we ourselves are playing as an order dragon, we do get access to lots of spirit damage just from our dragon lord. And critically, because we're going to be playing as an order dragon with Imperialist, we just need one more pip in order to take Tome of the Sanctuary. I recommend generally for your level 4 signature skill for your dragon to pick up Materium Aspect, but then either on level 8 or level 12, just take one order affinity and you should be good to go. And then you can take Tome of the Sanctuary, which gives you Anointed People with extra status resistance. This is really, really important. This is an insanely important stat that I think generally goes ignored, because most of the time the AI doesn't do a great job of exploiting status resistance, but in any sort of PvP situation, you need tons and tons of status resistance in order for your non-mythic units to stay alive, because otherwise they're just perma-stunned and doing nothing. And spirit resistance, of course, is really nice, because if you're fighting against a high culture, then you're going to be basically blanking their extra ability. That's a really, really big deal. And then against people who aren't high, then they won't be encountering spirit resistance as much, but generally I think high is one of the best factions in the game right now. And so if you can build anointed people into any sort of build in a PvP situation, you'll perform a lot better. You also get access to Keeper's Mark, which is another reason that you'll just perform a lot better, because if you're taking fatal damage for the first time, they're unable to die or use offensive abilities. Well, you know what pairs really well with that aspect of the route? If you die, or air quotes die, and then, can't die for that turn, then you get to heal 30. So you're going to have a lot of units that are going to last for a really long time with the pieces that you're going to give them. Then after that, you're going to pop back over to Materium, and you're just going to do Crucible, Realm, and Creator. You can do Golden Realm first or Crucible. It doesn't really matter. Crucible gives you access to Meteor Arrows, and so it makes your Glade Runners like a lot more damaging. Like they go from being basically harass to super heavy artillery. And so picking Meteor Arrows first is a pretty big deal, but like the rest of Tome of the Crucible is pretty meh. Lava Burst is a lot of damage. That's like the other big highlight here. But Tome of the Golden Realm, of course, gives you access to Gold Touched and Gold Golems. So if you're gonna supplement your bastions with some very, very heavy anti-large, Gold Golems are the best that you're gonna get, and getting them earlier means more experience points on them, so they're higher level, they have more hit points. So I would generally recommend going with Realm before Crucible, but if you just need to rush somebody out, Meteor Arrows are going to make you just destroy everything. And then eventually you're going to get to Tome of the Creator with Tectonic Shatter and create Earth Shatter engines, so you can win basically any siege on the offense and any field battle with Tectonic Shatter, just keeping everybody perma-stunned. It's a very, very strong end to a weird, very branching path, but that weird branching path gives the AI tools that it needs to survive. So here we have some weapons tests that I've done with the faction. So here we have a turn 28 Rite of Wealth. Turn 28 Rite of Wealth means, 2,000 extra gold, as well as the ability to just really turn the spigot on for our bastions. So here you can see our capital is only size 8. We've went ahead and just hard built Town Hall 3. You can do that when you have enough industry, and because we have access to a Clawmark Cave, and we did have a Builder's Quarters ruins until very recently, we were able to get Town Hall 3 down. So now we have bastions online, and now we can actually just go through, click hurry, and just push out as many bastions as we want. The way that this actually worked out is I had 5 bastions on the field by turn 33, which meant that I was able not only to fight off this defensive war, because the AI decided to go ahead and declare war on me. Little do they know that they're going to be facing down like a real terror very, very quickly, a swarm of spider bastions. But we've also just built up a generally very, very large industrial base with a Doom Depth Trench, just to help us push our knowledge a little more. The biggest problem with the faction overall is the lack of shadow. So this 160 knowledge even understates the problem for us, because we don't have access to Shadow 1 just yet. 5 more turns. But if you can get a 3rd city by turn 28, you can definitely have a lot more knowledge. This 2nd city is also particularly unwell because it doesn't have any forests until we hit Tome of the Glades. But it was just a free city over here, and generally I think getting as evil as possible to power up Tome of the Doom Herald is worth it. So we just attacked them and conquered them. And then here you can see the consequence of us pushing out 5 bastions. We've managed to get 18 units to siege down Green's capital out here. So these guys really have absolutely no resources to fight against us. We have a level 3 hero, a level 9 hero, and a level 9 Dragon Lord. And so we've managed to pick up a lot of extra Materium by going through Summon Elemental and Materium aspect. If we get to the point where we need to research Sanctuary, if we don't have a 3rd order by then, just reset your skills and pick the order aspect, because that's generally around the time when you want status resistance anyway. You should be picking up 2 levels of Dragon Scale, so your physical resistance should be fine. So just wait until you need to research Sanctuary, and then force yourself over to an Order Dragon if you want it. But yeah, here we're just gonna watch this little auto battle. I want to see how the AI plays it out. But because we have such a huge economy, we're able to support a really big army very, very quickly. We've actually been able to get 3 iron golems surviving. I think we had like 9 copper golems total or something like that, and 4 of them died. But hey, you know, copper golem's gonna copper golem. Those that survive become useful. And for that matter, the iron golems are dropping off, because now we are picking up bastions who are generally going to be stronger than iron golems as we get more racial transformations done on them. But we've also been able to pick up joy siphoners, which, as I said, is one of those really, really critical pieces when it comes to your military. It just keeps units alive in a longer battle really, really well. So yeah, we'll just auto battle this. Lost an iron golem and a halberdier, but then we wiped out everybody else. And so if we watch the replay, I'm sure it'll just highlight that we had a whole extra stack of units, which is something that's possible when you hit 2,000 gold on turn 28. But also you can see here that we just have really, really, really durable units, right? 10 defense, 8 resistance. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that these units have 2 natural elemental resistance to a lot of different things. These guys are going to be basically impossible to kill. And then over the course of this combat, what we're going to see is we'll start killing guys. Their morale will start to drop. We won't have our morale drop. And then eventually their units will start fumbling attacks. We'll start critting them. And even if we don't get a full rout, it doesn't really matter, because we're not looking for a full rout. We're just looking for units that are durable. That's what we're getting here. I do also just generally like watching these AI unit fights. Like, look what they're doing. They're just running an iron golem off into the distance just for fun. and in return, both snow spirits jump in on the same target. So this is kind of like why I don't like doing manual battles, because this is the AI that you're currently fighting against. But I think that there is some fun to be had. I think in the future we'll probably include manual battles for like ruler versus ruler fights, just so we can do some fun manual battle weapon tests. But the AI is look what they're doing with these units. They're just running them into things. There's also some really nice things about playing an industrious faction like this. So your steel shapers generally are worse than most healers, because they don't have just like a remove a status resistance problem. But because we have the Tome of Warding and the Staves of Warding, this means that our steel shapers can do resistance stacking very, very quickly, because each of their actions is going to add resistance to a unit. And then from there, they'll become basically impervious to magical attacks, and you should be able to just kind of resist out any sort of physical attacks using your natural bolstering from being industrious. Yeah, these bastions are just like attacking a halberdier as if it's nothing. They don't care about the anti-large bonus. Yeah, there they go. And you'll note that although this morale damage is not useful against undead, again, our Dragon Lord is an order dragon, and therefore naturally is always going to do spirit damage. I think that it's really important for your dragon, if you're going to be playing with any sort of morale damage, I think it's critical for your ruler to be good against undead, whether that means playing as an order dragon or just playing as high, kind of up to you. But you do need ways to deal with undead if you care about doing morale damage to an enemy. That's where fire is also very helpful, and so I think Materium overall solves the late game problem for this faction. And of course, early game, if you're playing yourself, then you can really abuse Steel Fury Chant. It's very easy to get tons and tons of Strengthened and Fortune on your entire army on turn 2. And of course, because a lot of your units have Demolisher, you can break through siege weapons very, very easily. Like a lot of your melee units, if you want to attack the wall, you just click on the unit, hold down Alt, and then you can right click on the wall, and your guys, because of Sundering Blows, will just tear the enemy walls apart. And so defending against this army in a siege is very, very difficult. Yep, and now we see units beginning to rout. You can see the insane durability doesn't even just stop at our top end. We have an Anvil Guard here with 7 defense and 2 resistance, with still access to Joy Siphoners and Sundering Blades, so it's perfectly capable of putting out real threat on an enemy. It's not just a unit on the board. So yeah, that's the early game fight that I had queued up for us. But I also have a mid game fight for us, and then we'll talk just a little bit about like play patterns that I think that are generally useful for this faction, as well as play patterns that I think that are generally useful for Underground Adaptation. So this is a weapons test that we're going to do against the AI here towards the end of the game for this faction. Now, we didn't actually get through to Tome of the Crucible in this run, I think we're just going to eliminate the AI and move on from here. But in the event that you hit Tome of the Crucible and Meteor Arrows, your Glade Runners really do start to become the carries in terms of their damage, much more so than you'd expect, because Meteor Arrows are just an outrageous upgrade on your damage output. And of course you have enchantments, you have extra range, as well as having them be mounted so they have extra movement. So being able to flexibly move into very powerful and durable Glade Runners is going to be really sweet. But we've managed to pick up a lot of the other important pieces for the build. You can see we have Anointed People, we have Draconian Transformation, Leaf Skin, Magical Wards, Joy Siphoners, and so these units are just going to be really beefy. We'll go ahead and just let them manual combat against the strongest 3 stacks that the AI can field right now. Now, of course, this is going to look really good because we're like twice the combat power, but even against similar combat power enemies, this army performs really well, just because of what sort of tools you give the AI for auto combat. Now, if you're manual combating, you can kind of do whatever you want to. It's going to be pretty easy for you to crush the enemy no matter what, but auto combat crushing is a little harder and a lot more reliant on getting access to strategic spells. This build is a little light on the strategic spell slot. Like at the moment, the strongest sort of pre-battle harass you have access to is the thing that gives people -5 morale. Like that's -15 morale over the course of the first 3 rounds is not nothing, but that's not enough to win a battle all on its own. But we did still wipe them out, and you can see that there are some morale collapses here, so I think it's worth it for us to just watch the replay just to see how the AI accomplished that win, even though we gave it pretty meaningfully overwhelming resources. This is against the hardest AI, it's just at the moment the AI it does struggle a little bit when it comes to wars. But importantly, we are fighting against Mystic. Mystic is one of these factions that generally is very threatening as Industrious, because again, Industrious mostly focuses on physical defense when it comes to the natural stats of their units. But because we went through the hassle of getting, Staves of Warding, as well as the magical wards and all of the nice little bonuses, our resistances are going to be almost as good as our defenses, and so it's going to be pretty hard for the Mystics to really pressure our units, even if the AI does stupid stuff like this. You'll see over the course of this battle. This is why I think generally auto combat is like more fun for me than manual combat, because if you're doing manual combat, you're fighting against the AI that's doing this, running their heroes ahead of all of their units and support. But it doesn't matter because our units are gonna just be basically unkillable. If you finish those 9 tomes, I think the next most important tome to pick up is Tome of the Evolution, just so that way you get access to Draconic Vitality, plus 15 hit points on all of your units is a lot of extra durability, especially because, they're gonna have regeneration by now. And then after that, I think it's just mix and match whatever sort of damaging tomes you think you need in order to break through a defensive wall on the other side. But because you have the morale damage, like really the only threatening things are gonna be things that are naturally immune to that. So you're gonna need to have plans to deal with gold golems, and you're gonna need plans to deal with undead. The faction naturally deals with the undead pretty well. Your dragon can really handle undead armies almost by itself, just to keep it alive. But gold golems, my recommendation is use the fact that they are very slow and move around them until you can get your own gold golems, and then have them fight the other ones. Like that's the big plan. If you're fighting against gold golems, that you can get them with this build, put them on the field, and make them fight each other like giant mecha. That's your best plan, I think, most of the time anyway. But if you survive long enough and you want to pick up Tome of the Amplification, that is of course a great way for your Glade Runners to turn from like harassing against the gold golems to just single-handedly slaughtering them. And yeah, you can just kind of see that now we are crushing their morale on all fronts. Part of that is because we are eliminating units, but this is, I think, a pretty great way to just show off why Joy Siphoners is so strong. You're able to keep your morale at really high levels no matter what, and critically, your opponents at very low morale levels under most circumstances. And there we see a full full-on rout. Oh my god. It's just their hero alive. Well, their hero is not going to last very long against our entire army. And of course, if you're playing a longer game, your dragons will also evolve, and obsidian dragons in particular are very, very helpful against gold golems. They do electric damage, which gold golems are naturally weak to. I think generally the faction is pretty well positioned from a military standpoint. Now that said, there are a couple of meaningful weaknesses and some really important things when it comes to how to play it out that we'll talk about after this this morale failure is done. Yeah, we can just leave. Now that said, you do have a couple of important weaknesses and a couple of important strengths. So here we have turn 9. I'm just showing a little bit of early game stuff just so that way you know where we're coming from. With Materium 1, you have the ability to plop down these outposts that can grab a second tile. That's actually really important, just to grab outposts, even if you're not planning on turning them into cities. Right now we only have 1, but I've definitely played games where we've had like 4 or 5. It just kind of depends on what the map gives to you. But you need to prioritize giving your cities access to mana nodes. And importantly, do not build special project improvements on those mana nodes, because you're going to need to flexibly move them back and forth between research posts and mana conduits in order to allow you to build the important city infrastructure to keep your research competitive, because you do not have Shadow 1 for a very, very long time. And so no matter how you're approaching the game, you really do need to take as much knowledge as possible. By prioritizing giving mana conduits to your cities, you can guarantee access to at least one academy. Cities in the underground are generally better at getting academies because they generally have access to mana nodes, but sometimes you have cities like this one which are just like oops all ore, and then they're really big production cities but don't really do much for your knowledge economy, and then you just kind of have to play around with what you got. Also important to your early development is placing these outposts just so that way you have friendly territory to not only heal in but move through. By having this outpost here, we're able to very quickly move a second army from Redfjorn up to Quenfjorn, so that way we can annex this other city. We'll have a second city with 3 population by turn 15 or 16 whenever the annexation is done. But we're also going to be able to clear out all of these extra troops in here, get a whole lot of extra experience points for our units, and therefore keep our dragon growing. Because you really would like to hit level 12 before you hit Sanctuary. That's like a critical break point, but if you don't, again, it's not the end of the world to just reset your skills and pick the order aspect. Order aspect is very, very good once you need status resistance, but Materium aspect is like 2D defense. At the beginning of the game, this keeps you alive really, really, really well. But you want to get as much evil as quickly as possible as this faction, just so that whenever your Tome of the Doom Herald turns on, you can really, really leverage Doom Death Trench. That might mean sacking a couple of cities. It kind of depends on how many cities are near you and what sort of enemies you're looking at. But if you sack a city, you do lose a couple of turns of growth. This faction does not naturally get nature very early, and so it's going to have a harder time rebuilding those cities. Those cities basically are going to be non-functional unless you get haste berries. So burn a city down only if you're like not counting on it being one of your 3 important cities at the beginning, and then refound it. It at least saves you some Imperium and therefore lets you move through the Imperium tree faster. Refounding a city only costs 100 as opposed to the 200 for annexing it, but it does mean, of course, sacrificing a lot of pops. So it's a good and a bad, but you want to be attacking free cities no matter what, because attacking them is going to give you evil. Pillaging their stuff is going to give you evil, and it should be pretty easy to get to, at the very least, minus 25 before Tome of the Doom Herald comes on, but I think it's pretty easy to get to minus 52. One final note before we leave, I am actually going to stream this tomorrow on Saturday, so if you want to see me play against the AI, it'll probably be against Brutal, but we'll see. But I'm going to do a full stream with Rainbow Dwarves and the Skittles, and I think it should be a lot of fun. It'll definitely let us show off what the Underground Adaptation is really about and what you can do with it. Alright, that's Walker. Take care.